In this second part of the lecture, we are going to focus on how to implement the development plans. Well, this is the overview of this part of the session. Basically, we are going to explain the different stages, the different steps that are involved in the process of implementing an asset acquisition or development plan from the project approval to the introduction into service. So basically, we are going to see how is the process and which are the different actions that we need to take into consideration. In the final part of this section, I will be explaining how we should manage the change in the implementation stage. Let's present in now the different steps that we will be following when implementing an asset acquisition or development plan. We can identify a number of 12 different stages in that process. Well, first of all, it's important that you understand the context in which we are. In the last week and in the part A of this lecture, we have been explaining the initiation and planning phase, which are obviously connected with the business need identification, the capability requirement analysis, the pre-feasibility and feasibility analysis, the project plan, and obviously the development of the business case. The next step now is to carry out the acquisition or development. And in order to do that, the first thing that we need is a development team that we need to establish accordingly with the project scope. Also, it's very important that a development project schedule has been already prepared. Some important roles that we can identify across many projects are the project manager, the assistant project managers, the logistic support managers, the person in charge of the schedule, commercial managers, contracts managers, and technical and administrative personnel. Well, one of the first actions that we need to do is to configure the team. Obviously, the configuration of the team must be related with the project scope and with the capabilities that we are planning to implement. So, first of all, we need to identify the skills which are required for that particular project. In that sense, to have a look at the work breakdown structure will provide us the right information in order to identify which skills, which abilities are needed. After that, we will be in the position to identify people with these skills, and we will have to talk to these potential team members. Obviously, in some cases, we will have to negotiate with the functional supervisor. I mean, at organizational level, we need to be able to get the people that we want on board. If we are successful, we can assemble the team. If not, we will have to renegotiate with top management about the team members that we can include in our project team. In the implementation of the development plans, we can distinguish three main stages. The first one is about the creation and letting of contracts. These contracts for the acquisition, development, or construction that the project involves. The second one would be the implementation of the defined work. So basically, we have already identified all the activities that we need to carry out, and now we have to implement them. The third stage is the introduction into service of the new capability. Sometimes it's very useful to use software in order to aid the managing of the project, particularly in large projects. Before implementation, obviously, detailed plans are required for the different activities, the resources that will be allocated to these activities, about the resource allocation, obviously, the critical path, the Gantt chart, the plan of the activities, and finally, also we need plan for the acquisition procedure standards. As part of the planification, we will be defining some project milestones. This project milestone will be very useful at identifying key facts affecting the project. Some typical milestones that we can introduce in the project are represented in the following list: the definition of requirements, the design or acquisition specification, the tendering, the pre-contract testing and evaluation, the contract let, the completion of the installation, the completion of the commissioning, the completion of the pre-acceptance testing, the final acceptance, and obviously the start of the operation. A third step in that process is the evaluation of suppliers. Before committing to a supplier, we need to assess the potential ability of the supplier to deliver what is needed for the business development, what is needed for our project. This will involve both technical and managerial competence, but also financial viability, track of record. It means to get information about the behavior of that supplier in previous project, and also we can consider the future potential of the supplier. I mean, obviously the trend is to prefer a larger organization to smaller companies, but sometimes small companies can become a very good supplier. Maybe the key issue is to look at the competence of the supplier. I mean, to look at the connection between the competence of the supplier and the particular capability that we are needing from this supplier for this particular project. Steps number 4 is about equipment selection and trials. The selection process for the equipment will involve some trials in order to check the suitability of this equipment against the function and performance specifications that we include in the selection criteria previously. The main considerations that we will include in these trials will be the reliability, maintainability, and logistic support that can affect the delivery of the capability over the life cycle of the asset. It's important that we consider the complete life cycle when we are deciding on the equipment selection. This equipment selection will involve the implementation of a logistic support plan that obviously we will have to update in order to reflect the new equipment that we are adding through the acquisition process. The sixth stage that we can consider is the financial and contract process. This figure helps to understand that process. Obviously, the starting point is the capital project, and when we are defining the project and analyzing the risk, we are defining the factors that allow us to curse the invitation to register interest. This will allow us to identify potential suppliers, and we will be in the position to request for tender. After that, we will screen and select the preferred options, and we will have the first shortlist. After negotiation and due diligence of different bidders, we will review the shortlist and we will select our preferred bidder, and we will start the contract negotiation. And after these negotiations, we will have the final contract. The step number 7 is to develop the tools to check the maturity status of the project. Basically, we will look at different aspects, which are the business status, the technical status, the cost, the schedule, and the operations and support. Obviously, we have different levels of maturity that we will be checking throughout the implementation of the project. The step number 8 is connected with the assignation of responsibilities. It's very important that every component of the team has a clear idea about his or her role and responsibilities. It's very, very important that people working together understand what their responsibilities are. A very useful tool in order to allocate the responsibilities and make clear who is responsible for each specific activity is the RACI analysis. The RACI chart is a chart in which the columns contains the personal functions and the rows will contain the activities. Each cell contains one or more of the following letters R, A, C, or I, indicating if the person is responsible, accountable, consulted, or just informed. Here you have a simple example on how the RACI chart works. Here we identify some key roles in a project: project manager, contracts manager, logistics support manager, equipment user support representative, and here some key activities that we need to fulfill in a project, like the acquisition contract, meeting the schedule, logistics support plan. For example, if we focus on this activity, the logistic support plan, obviously the responsible of this activity will be the logistic support manager. But however, we are also allocating some degree of responsibility to the other figures. For example, the project manager will be accountable, the contract manager will be just consulted, and the equipment user support representative will be simply informed. This type of RACI chart can be very complex and include many different activities. But definitely, this is a very good tool to allocate responsibilities and make everyone aware of their own responsibilities and the degree of that responsibility. During the implementation of the project, it's important to establish reporting methods in order to check the progress of the management of the project. We will need different types of reports in order to follow the different areas which are included in the project. So we can distinguish financial reports, project overview reports, reports about the recent activities and the activities which are immediately forthcoming, the logistics support and sustainment report, capital budget progress, and the project summary report, including other details of the project. These reports are usually shared between the main stakeholders. Particularly, they are very useful for the sponsors. In connection with the project management reports, we will find the project progress monitoring. In the implementation of the project, the progress needs to be monitored, indicating the status regarding different features. We can use different methods like traffic light symbols or phase symbols in order to provide a rapid visual of the project status. Here you can see the main areas in which we usually focus the monitoring of the project progress. Obviously, the physical progress against the project plan, the financial status, obviously connected with the approved budget, the current problem severity, the risk severity against our risk management plan, and the financial forecast in order to know if the project is on track in terms of cost and economical issues. Here you have an example of a project progress report by using phase symbols. Uh, in this column, we are including different factors, key factors like schedule, risk, cost, operational support, training, and we will be comparing the performance to date with the forecast. And we will include comments that will help to understand if the performance to date and forecast are aligned, and if they are not aligned, to explain what are the reasons that explain this mismatch. The final stage in the implementation process is the commissioning and introduction into service. The commissioning of a new physical asset, an industrial plant, or a building will involve the builder or developer in starting up and operating on a trial basis to check the functionality and the operation of the physical asset. So, a commissioning manager will be appointed to carry out these activities. The performance of the physical asset will be checked and any operating or functional issues will be addressed in advance. The site operation representative is a key figure that will represent the interest of operation in the installation and commissioning process. Any defects identified in this testing stage should be addressed before the acceptance of the equipment. And we must make sure that the operation is safe before handover of the equipment to operation. Other important aspect to consider is training, especially connected with the introduction into service. We need to design training activities that need to be complete by operators and maintainers prior to introduction into service. Obviously, the operating and maintenance procedure should include the consideration and treatment of the different hazards and consider the corresponding contingency plans. Very briefly, before finishing this lecture, I would like to include some aspects connected with change management in the implementation stage. Well, it's important that the managers think about the impact of the different changes on all aspects of work activities during the planning process. In any change, the workers will want to protect their jobs and status. This is what we call resistance to change because usually people don't like changes. They will prefer to keep the status quo. So it's important that we consider these psychological aspects and we check the implications of change from the worker and user's perspective. In order to minimize the impact of these changes and make this process to run smoothly, we need to prepare some pilot studies or trial implementations and introduce the changes step by step, what we call evolutionary changes. But in the end, sometimes the managers must be ready to take responsibility for whatever hard decisions are required. So the key aspect here is that when we decide a change, we need to provide some conversion training. Also, it's a good practice to involve the supervisors and other key stakeholders as part of this change. To develop an implementation kit which includes equipment and all the documentation and trainings that are going to be necessary for implementing this change will be very helpful to make that process smoothly. Also, it's very important to provide the right instructions, the procedures, and checklists in order to check that the change is running smoothly. And finally, we need to make sure that the solution that we are implementing through this change is going to be sustainable. Well, we're finishing now this lecture. Here you can check the references for this topic. Basically, you can find more information in the chapter 5 of the Physical Asset Management book, and also to check this book, Pinto 2016 Project Management Achieving Competitive Advantage, where you can find useful information about the implementation stage for projects.